Hello everyone, I'm Auntie Kara, but this video is not for kids. This is another edition of book reviews for grown-ups who love fairy tales. Today we're going to be talking about White as Snow by Veronica Bonn. This is book 1 in the Sleeping Kingdom series, and it's the first and only one I've read so far. This book is kind of a modern, mature, well, not so much modern, a mature take on many different fairy tales. This one book is, within it has Snow White, the Evil Queen, the Seven Dwarves, Peter Pan, Cinderella, Rapunzel, a little bit of Beauty and the Beast. So it is a vast, marvelous mingling of all the stories. And when I do have to say, when I first started it, I wasn't sure how much I was going to like it. The way the story is told is in sections. Each chapter is from a different character's perspective. So initially the story feels quite like it's bits and pieces, like it feels fairly compartmentalized. But if that's something that you're reading it and you're like, I'm not sure about this, I felt the same way too, and just stick with it because all the different worlds eventually collide and you kind of see and learn how all of the stories fit together. And it's really cool to see how people can take all these different stories and find ways to interweave them and to make them really connected. So like, Peter Pan is connected to another story that interweaves with Snow White, and Snow White also interweaves with Rapunzel, and I'm not quite sure how Cinderella fits in other than being a part of the whole Sleeping Kingdom world, but I think that is going to come in further books. If you love fairy tales, if you're someone who loves magic and fantasy, I would definitely recommend this book. It is a magical sense of escapism. It very much tingles that little nostalgic part of our child brain that wants those fairy tales and those magic senses, but with more of an adult perspective to it. Content warning if you're someone with a younger, young adult, younger child, early teens, who might want to read this story. There is some sexual content. It's not super explicit. I will say that it's kind of, I'd say PG-13 about it all. It talks about it, it references it, but it doesn't really go into much detail. So, as your comfort allows, but I don't think it's something that is super risque. I do love the scenery in this book. I love all the different names. All the characters are given, for the most part, slightly different names, and they're all very connected to the original names that we all know, but also you can tell the authors put a lot of thought into what sort of culture that character would come from, as well as, in our world, what culture the story originated from. So like certain stories that took place in France have more of a French perspective, and the ones that came from like German origin have more of a German perspective to it, and that part was really interesting to me to see how that all played out. So I am going to read a little bit for you. I have 3 short passages. The first one is from Elspeth. I'm never sure if I'm saying that right. It's Elspeth. Elspeth, I think. And this is the day of her wedding. In the light of the candles in the dressing chamber, if the light of the candles in the dressing chamber impressed Elspeth, it was nothing compared to the luminance of the cathedral. Countless candles lit the great hall. Every inch that wasn't occupied by a noble lord or lady held a candle. It was like walking through a sea of stars. Music streamed from the orchestra above Elspeth as Elspeth entered. The 6 darling girls whispered with excitement as they got in line to carry her train. Flower crowns adorned their heads, their ivory dresses matching the silk of Elspeth's gown. The smell of roses poured from every corner of the cathedral. It eased Elspeth's anxious nerves. As happy as she was for this moment, for so long she had waited for it, she just wanted it to be finished. She was ready to be queen. As she made her way down the aisle, the noble lords and ladies turned to face her. The ladies wore colorful silk gowns with beaded bodices, while the lords wore their finest tunics and breeches. Knights in shining armor guarded all the doors. They stood tall and proud, ready to serve their beloved king at any moment. Nothing would interrupt the most joyous of occasions. I think I'll stop there. Just give you a little taste. It's very magical and very, the whole thing is very beautiful and very fantastical. All right. And the next one I'm going to read for you is from the perspective of Pan. I love Peter Pan, so I was very happy he was in this story. As Pan flew over the cursed forest, he slowed. More than once he thought about landing in the center of the forest where he could see the tip-top of the decrepit castle. It was hidden deep within the bush, the trees so close together that he could barely see through them at all. But now and then, Pan could see the top of the spiral tower overgrown with ivy, and beside it a thin puff of smoke spindling up through the trees. The dragon. He knew the legend, same as most people. The incident happened a few years after he had been born, but before he had been ostracized by his father. Whoever defeated the dragon would be ruler of all the broken land. But it wasn't the broken land Pan was after. More than once he'd fantasized about taming the dragon, make himself her master, and ride in on his father's kingdom on the back of the dragon. That would get his attention. Better yet, it would defeat him, and Pan would get what he wanted at last. But tonight, Pan flew past the dragon. It was a risk that he couldn't take. He'd been working too hard for too long on the plan already set in motion that he didn't want to lose everything on a risky plot. Let the dragon continue to sleep until the broken land was nothing but forest. He would have his kingdom by then. I do have to say the Peter Pan story and the way it connects to the larger world is very, very well done. I really think it was very thought out, and the whole thing is very thought out, the way everything kind of interweaves and connects to each other. So the next one I'm going to read is from Elodie, who is the Cinderella figure in the story. When the spring started to thaw the winter storm, Ella was surprised to see a tiny bud of green poke out of the ground from where she had hastily planted the withered twig from her father. She touched the bud lovingly and gave it water. Proud, she smiled and put her hands on her hips. A white dove landed on the branch of her mother's willow tree and cooed at her. It was early for birds to be returning from the winter. The bird bobbed its head and looked at Ella, blinking its eyes. Ella watched it thoughtfully. Madame Mason yelled at her to come back inside and get back to work on the silverware. Lundi was silverware day. The dove continued to return each morning as Ella went out to water the seedling. She started to sneak away some of the chicken feed to bring to the dove. It always sat on the same branch of her mother's willow tree. Ella didn't see a nest nearby, and she didn't notice where the dove flew to when it left her after breakfast. But she was thankful for the peaceful company in the morning. The dove was kinder than her stepmother and stepsisters, and not as greedy as the other animals who she fed. The dove seemed to be there for her, not for her food. One morning, Ella tried to feed the dove from a different spot. She hid in the bushes and watched as it landed on her mother's willow tree. It cooed and looked around as though it was waiting for her. Ella popped out of the bush and threw the feed in front of her. It was still quite far away from the tree. The dove stared at the feed and cocked its head to the side. "Come here if you want it," Elodie trilled. The dove didn't move. It picked at something on its wing and then picked at the leaves of the willow tree. It cooed again and flapped its wings. Ella frowned. She picked up as much of the fallen feed as she could and walked over to the tree. She held the feed in her cupped hands and lifted them up for the dove. The dove fluttered down and landed on her wrist. It pecked at the feed in her hands and then stopped to look at her. Ella smiled and cooed softly at it. It blinked and then looked at her necklace. It sparkled in the sunlight, and Ella saw it reflect the tiny dove's eye. Before Ella could react, the bird pecked at her necklace. She let out a soft scream and threw her hands up in defense. The dove flapped its wings as the feed rained down and flew back up to the tree branch. Ella held her necklace in her hand and looked up at the dove. "Don't do that. This was my mother's. It's a family heirloom." All right, so there's your taste for the day. I am going to continue with the series because I'm really intrigued. It ended on a bit of a cliffhanger, so I can't wait to see where it leads. I will review the next one when I read it, but in the meantime, please feel free to pick this book up. It is a great read. It is super magical, and it will definitely feed your soul. If you have read it, or if you're going to read that, don't forget to leave a comment in my comic section, and like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Ta-ta for now.